Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest is a stand-up comedian who hosts the popular podcast, Me and My More Successful Friends, where she interviews people in and around Los Angeles who seem like they have made it. She has been sober for 14 months now, and her journey tracks a pretty interesting course where in sobriety, she has had to learn if she can still be funny on stage without first getting loaded. Won't you please welcome Lori Marie. The exciting thing of having you back is this is an experiment, so it's like, who knows, maybe this will be great. I don't know, right?
For me, the first one was actually really helpful because you were the first person I had full on that wasn't a close friend or a sponsor that I had actually told certain things to.
Right, sure.
So then later I was like, I'm just more concerned with people, places, and things, and people listening and hearing them be a part of my story and
sure.
and not be aware that they were a part of it. I don't think that's fair for them because
sure.
I just don't.
Yeah, that's fair.
They're not going to understand. And I think I had talked one other time at a meeting. I did 30 minutes and I had only had 90 days.
Right. That's, and it was sometimes amazing.
It was,
for
but
the
it was
people
also,
listening.
Yeah, for the new people in the room that were like, oh, how do you get to 90 days?
Old people. Because sometimes, as an old person, I forget what it was like. I forget how magic it was those first 90 days.
I know.
And how thankful I was to be
sober.
Yeah, to be sober, to have a new perspective, a new chance, to have hope. Yeah. So anyway, all right. Well, that's all all totally. Totally fair and interesting. And so, let's do it.
All right.
It's Lori Marie, right?
Yeah. Yes.
What happened? How is it now?
Okay, so it's so funny because I was thinking about this on the drive over. I was like, how did I really grow up? Because everyone always kind of starts off with this is how I grew up. My childhood was really normal, I think, from the outside.
Right.
Parents were together. The only nuances are probably that my mom was really strict and kind of a worrier all growing up.
Where'd you grow up?
In Thousand Oaks.
Thousand Oaks, right.
Yeah. And then my dad was sort of the best friend. So I two parents kind of dueling each other growing up. So it was really easy for me to play on each of them. But I was always very shy. And I had an older sister who we were really close until we weren't. And then as you get older, as a teenager, she kind of wanted nothing to do with me. Right. But it's so funny because when I think back to all the milestones that you hit as a teenager, when you're growing up in adolescence and you're just sort of the first time you smoke pot or the first time you have a drink, I was always trying to keep up with her.
Right.
But I didn't know when she did all of those things. I didn't know that when she was doing all those things, it was at the same time that I was doing it. Because I had my first drink when I was 13.
So, and you say that you were trying. So, when did you find out that she was doing it at the same time you were doing it?
Later, in college.
Right. She was and when you had that conversation with her, was it she was trying to keep up with you at that point? Or it just happened to be that you guys were living parallel lives?
I think we were just living parallel lives.
Right.
I was just always, I worshipped her. I always kind of just wanted to be like her. And I always liked all of her friends. I always was hanging out here and there with some of her friends, which she would get a little jealous. And then after a while, it was just sort of I was a freshman when and she was a senior in high school. So
right.
I only had 1 year of really being around her. And
right.
then she went off to college. And then when she was in college, my parents were kind of you can't go visit her until you're 18.
Really?
Yeah, my mom to go hang out by myself. She
right.
my sister didn't want me to, why would she want her 16 or 17-year-old sister to be around anyways? It was kind of just one of those things. But I remember when I had my first drink at 13 and everything kind of circles back to this one outside issue is that it was because of a guy. Like,
right.
I had a crush on a guy. I wanted to impress him, and he was like, "Do you want a beer?" I was at we were at a family birthday party for his family, and I just remember being madly in love with this guy, and I would do anything to like become a part of, to like not be on the outside anymore, but to be accepted. And so he offered me a beer, and then that turned into like 3, like pretty quickly.
Right.
And, you know, I'm a tiny person, so the fact that I was still standing.
Did you like it?
I loved it, yeah.
Right.
It was like this.
Did it taste good?
Yeah.
Had you tasted beer before?
Beer, I had always had like sips of beer here and there from my dad as a kid. And I think I always knew like that I was going to like drinking because I've told you before, like when I was really little, I would wake up in the middle of the night like with cravings for soda.
Right.
And I would like go downstairs and I would like sneak Coca-Colas and drink like 6 of them.
Right.
And then go back to bed and be fine. And it's so crazy that like that's so much sugar, you know?
Right.
But I just remember the feeling. It was always that, and that didn't resonate until I got sober. Like when I started going through like, why do I have this addictive personality? Where does this stem from? And have I always been like this? It didn't resonate until I was like, oh my God, that was probably the first time I really like was craving stuff.
Right.
Which I think for kids, I mean, you have kids, so I'm sure you can attest to this. But like we go, you know, kids get crazy for sugar and like there's certain things that they obsess over, but it's like normal. But this was like a different kind of obsession. It was like I had to have it and I could not stop thinking about it.
Right.
And so fast forward to when I had my first drink, it was sort of just like, oh, like this is how I get the guy. Like that was my vision of like being accepted, being popular, and being desired in that moment when I had that first drink. I was
did it work?
I probably thought yes a lot of the time, but like.
But what about in that instance when you were 13?
Yeah, I think
did,
yeah, he like accepted me. He like thought
Right.
I was cool, and like after that, when I would run into him all the time because it was my mom's best friend's son. He was always around.
Right.
It was sort of like we had this like shared secret because no one found out.
Right.
No one found out that day that I had had those drinks.
Sure.
That I think because no one ever said anything, and my mom was very much the kind of person that like you did something wrong or you broke a rule, like she was going to tell you immediately. There was no like, oh, maybe she'll figure it out. Let's let her navigate this.
Right.
I didn't have like cool, you know, hippie parents that were like, let's just let them experience shit.
Sure.
So then that was my first drink, and then I found out later that like all my friends at that time, this was like the summer before 9th grade, everyone was drinking.
Right.
And you know, my best friend from junior high all the way through high school, she was a big influence in my life because she grew up in this like very like really, it was so interesting because her parents were very like Christian and like they would go to church, and she would take me to youth group. I didn't grow up in a religious family.
Right.
But I got influenced by her, and I always wanted, she was like so popular. Everyone wanted to be her. Every guy wanted to date her. This was my best friend.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like the lackey. And I thought, oh, if I am like my best friend, you know, then things like, I'll have like it really easy. Like things will just be really easy.
Sure.
Because I was such a shy kid growing up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, drinking was just this thing that it was normal and innocent. And then I have like flashes of like sophomore.
But wait, let me ask you.
Yeah.
What do you think her Christianity had to do with anything?
I
Because
think
like this came up last time,
Yeah.
and I ended up cutting it from the interview because I was like, I don't understand
the connection. So I thought like, because I didn't grow up with like a religious background anyway, I viewed her as this person that was like this model of like how you could be wholesome and good, but also be
bad.
she actually like popular and
Right.
and really like was respected. Like,
But was she a partier too?
no,
She wasn't.
that was the thing. It was like I had this best friend that was like all the things I wanted to be, but I was still the one that sort of like wanted to rebel and like live on the edge a little bit. And that's interesting. I mean, I wonder, like, did you feel like
sort of what we think of as Christian guilt for like, where you try to like, scrub yourself clean every time you drank?
No.
I mean, when I was a kid, when I discovered masturbation, it was like a thing for me, but I was like, whatever, I grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
So every time I jerked off,
you felt guilty.
I felt guilty. And I got it into my head. This is crazy. I've never told anyone this, but that if I did 90 push-ups every time, that was like penance. And like,
really funny.
By the time I graduated from 9th, I had like, my chest was huge.
You were cut. So it was a good thing.
And I would like keep in my head, because like sometimes I'd be too tired to do the 90 push-ups. So I'd be like, all right, well, I have to remember I owe 90 push-ups.
Oh my
And then
gosh.
so the next day I would owe 360 push-ups.
That's amazing. I never had anything like that, except that I just wanted this friend for whatever reason. Like, I needed her to approve of everything I did.
Right.
And then I needed to also be able to, like, be popular, I guess. It was like this fixation of, like, I wanted everyone to like me. And the way everyone was going to like me is if I, did everything right, but also, like, partook once in a while in the drinking and the partying. And there were times that, like, she would be around when we would be in groups and people would be doing that. But she was never actually, like, she was just, like, an observer. Like, she kind of always knew who she was.
Right.
At such a young age. And that was something that, like, I always sort of envied.
Is she still around now? Are you guys still pals?
we're not close.
Is she married and has 4 children?
She's married. and I was at her wedding, so that's...
Is she still in 1,000 Oaks?
She's still in the area, yeah.
Right.
She still lives in Ventura County.
Nice.
And she's still she's like one of those friends that over the last 20 years, like, you don't talk every day anymore, but 6 months could go by and then you
pick up right
yeah,
where
you
left
go
off.
get a coffee and you catch up.
And would you feel like that when you were partying that you were like betraying who you had sort of presented yourself to be to her?
I think so, yeah. I think at the time I always knew sometimes she was kind of, as my friend, like, disappointed in me.
Right.
But I cared more about, after a while, I cared more about what everyone else thought.
Right, but you still had this kind of moral guidance, I guess.
Yeah, she was always like this really, really prominent person in my life that affected me greatly.
Right. That's great to have, actually, because it's sort of, you're like sometimes I find that now, or more when I was drinking, when things would go like awry and I would I just want to get back to that place where I knew who I was.
Yeah, so she was kind of that person that sort of like that best friend that you see like in movies that, when one of the friends kind of finds a new group or like strays off the beaten, the path, like she was always the one that was kind of like, oh, I still really care deeply about this friendship, so I'm going to try to like straighten out. And I did, and like for a while, I got into some trouble this summer, like after my sophomore year of high school, where my parents kind of were like, oh my God, who is our daughter? Who is this person that we raised? Like it was just one of those sort of like trying to keep up with the Joneses type scenarios where I knew everything I was doing wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. Like got caught for shoplifting.
Right.
One of my friends, like a new group of friends that I started hanging out with sort of influenced me to do these things. And it was like I didn't want to be the one not doing it.
Sure.
So I did it, and then me and another friend got caught, and then I tried to like convince my dad to not tell my mom because my dad was always the cool one, and he finally had hit his breaking point because it was all,
with the shoplifting incident, I mean, so you said like your friends wanted you to do this thing, or they were going to do this thing, and you didn't want to be left out. I mean, then you did it.
Yeah.
You paid a horrible consequence for
it. For being 15, yeah, it was like...
And did you learn a lesson from that? I mean, did that resonate with you? Like, oh, you know what? I just wondered this with my own kids. Like, my kids are so, like, they're so morally clear right now about what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with, and they really don't step out of their comfort zone, generally, due to peer pressure, and I'm sure that will change at some point. And I wonder, like, was there after that, were you like, oh, I'm just like, if I hadn't done this thing that made me uncomfortable, I'd be fine right now?
Yeah, I think I definitely had those feelings because my parents took it to such an extreme. Like, it was like this, it was like I remember coming home that day and having to tell my mom because, I'd never, aside from having alcohol, I had never done anything so bad, or at least that I was aware of, that I felt shame about.
Sure.
So, like, drinking, I didn't feel shame.
Right.
Like, you're a teenager, so you're, like, having weird sexual experiences. And even then, when I had, like, certain experiences, I didn't feel shame yet. I just felt like, oh, this is just a thing that happened.
Right.
So this was, like, the first time at 15 going on 16 where I was, like, I felt shame. And I was like, oh, my God, I let my parents down.
Right.
But it was for selfish reasons. It wasn't like, oh, I feel bad that I disappointed them. It was like, oh, I feel bad that I disappointed them because now I don't have a summer. And now, like, I'm the bad kid. And everyone at school is going to find out that I got grounded for the entire summer, for shoplifting. And it wasn't this, like, cool, like, I don't know. Because then, shortly after that, my parents were like, what are we going to do with you, My sister was like, put her in boarding school. And I was like, oh, my God. I didn't like murder anyone. I didn't like partake in like gang activity.
Right.
Like, I'm not doing hard drugs.
Right.
Yeah, just kidding. Yeah, so it was just so weird. And like spending the entire summer going to therapy, my mom decided to put me in therapy, was like this really actually amazing experience because it was like for the first time I had someone I could like actually tell the truth to, because I think I spent my whole like teens up until that point just like wearing a mask in a way, like trying to be this like perfect kid for my parents, but then also trying to be the cool kid at school, but then also having this best friend who was both already and then trying to keep up with her, and it was like too much. And so then I got into therapy, and my parents are divorced now, but at the time I remember growing up, my sister and I wishing that they would divorce because it caused a lot of like, there was just so much like animosity in the house all the time. And I think that's why I never wanted to be there.
Right. And
then I started, just doing like the normal shit, like partying and drinking on the weekends and like trying to go meet guys and, and then making bad decisions.
Sure.
Which like, it's a miracle that some of the situations I put myself in, even in high school, like weren't more dangerous and like crazier things didn't happen to me. But there were some like sexual experiences that had happened that I kind of like carried with me. And then when college came around, it was like, oh, like I wasn't in a sorority, but I was in college, and like I was drinking like a sorority girl. Like, like blacking out, not feeling bad about it. And like that was probably the next like 10 years of my life. Everything I did involved drinking.
Right.
It was like I would be at work nannying, the mom would come home and I was like staying with them part-time.
Right.
And it would be like, let's have a bottle of wine.
Sure.
Or the dad would come home and then me and the mom would like go out.
Right.
And drink. And it was all still really fun, even when like shit got real. Like I remember one time we went to Vegas. It was like my second time in Vegas ever. And the mom and I went there to meet up with some people that she knew. She had like friends that lived there. And I remember I forget, she like went to go meet someone, and for whatever reason, we were staying at the MGM. I was like, I'm going to go roam the casino. Because like Vegas was like still shiny and new.
Sure,
I'd only been like one other time. And I remember just like throwing back shots and like meeting these guys at like one of the bars. And like for whatever reason, one of the guys was like, hey, I'll give you $50 and we'll go play craps.
Right.
And I'm like hammered.
Sure.
And anyone watching from the outside is probably like this young girl getting wasted with these like they were like older men.
Right.
Like older.
Right.
And one of them was a doctor, and he was like, hey, look at this. And he had a voucher. He had like just won like $15,000 on the slots.
Wow.
And he was like, if you triple my $50, I'll give you half that money and the voucher. And so I'm like sitting with him at the craps tables, and my sensories are starting to go off that like this guy
is a lech.
Is thinking that I'm like an escort.
Right.
Because I'm like some young girl. I'm like dressed as you're supposed to dress when you go to Vegas clubs. And I'm by myself. And I wasn't like hammered to the point that I couldn't walk. But I was drunk enough to where I was like, you know what? Maybe I will get this money and I don't have to do anything.
Right.
And like it was so naive. And like, I don't know if you know this in Vegas, but like a lot of the times I don't know the laws, but I think that like in certain hotels, like if they see prostitution happening, like they're going to kick you out.
Right.
So I remember one of the bouncers sort of like kept hovering. Like he was everywhere we were.
Right.
And at one point the guy like put his hand on my leg and he was like, I think like if you want, like you can come back to my room with me, like we have more alcohol up there.
Right.
And the bouncer is like kind of like super close, like probably 5 feet away.
Right.
And I'm super drunk and I'm starting to clue into this guy thinks I'm an escort, but for whatever reason there's a part of me that's like, well, maybe I'll still get the voucher, right? Like that like dumb, naive, selfish, like I'll just get the voucher and then I'll take off and then I'll have this epic story to tell all my friends like, oh, I totally tricked this guy. And then so the guy has his hand on my leg. I think at this point we weren't at a craps table anymore. Maybe we had moved on to blackjack. It's all kind of fuzzy. I just remember the fucking security guy, and I remember his hand on my leg, and I remember freaking out internally. And then I'm like, I have to go to the bathroom. I run to the bathroom. I start like sobbing because all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, like, what the fuck am I doing?
Right.
Like, I'm like trying to like snow this guy to like get this money from him, but also like he thinks I'm an escort. So like I felt more ashamed that like this person thought I was a fucking escort. And then also the security comes up and they're like, what's going on? Are you okay? And I was like, they're like, do you know those men? I was like, no, I don't. They're like, where are you staying? And they're like interrogating me and I'm really drunk. And they're like, they're like, do you have a room here? And I was like, yeah, I have a room. They're like, we're going to walk you back to your room.
Was your boss there?
Yeah, my boss was there and I'm just sobbing.
Was she like, what the fuck?
She was just like, what happened? And then like she had like her friends were in the room. So it was like, and they like have met me before. So it was like this weird thing.
Right, it's like the nanny's lost her shit.
Yeah, it was like the nanny has...
As like a parent with the nanny, I'm like, if my nanny was like, I'd be like, what the fuck? What have I done? Yeah, you know, as a kid though, I think like, I don't know. I mean, you have a limited perspective on life. So like you grow up with these adults who are like, yeah, this is what adulthood looks like. Yeah, you do these weird things and weird shit happens, but it's fine because whatever, you've got, you know, money and privilege and there's really no consequences for these things. And like, you know, with sort of better adult influences in your life, and it's not anyone's fault. I mean, this is just me thinking like, you know, you can be presented like like I think for me as a drinker all my life, I didn't understand that there was a different world that I could be living in. Like it had never been shown to me by anyone who felt like similar enough to me, to my background and the way I grew up and stuff, that I was like, oh, I could totally live that life instead. Like it just was never presented. Yeah. And listening to your story, it just kind of makes me realize that like as a kid, you know, you come up and they're just, you know, you can just get on a path that shows you this thing and you're like, oh, that's life, you know? Whereas it's just as possible you would have been shown a life where it's like, you know, the only happiness is, you know, radical service to humanity, and you would have gone to, you know, Namibia to dig wells, and you would have been like completely fulfilled and happy, and it would have been a totally different experience. It's just, I don't know, something to think about. It
is weird that like all the choices that I had made, every time I felt, I started to feel bad about myself. I was always kind of the friend, especially in my early 20s, that went out, had a crazy night of drinking, and had a story the next day.
Right, which is fun.
Yeah, but it was always like, well, why'd you do that? Or like I would call my sister and she's like, well, why didn't, it was always, and I was like,
the stories where you were kind of like, oh, wait.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Did I just like, it's fun. It's just weird how like.
And I thought it was
particularly
funny.
when you're doing drinking and doing drugs, how quickly you end up in like weird shit zone. You're like, oh, this isn't my life.
I end up graduating. I, drink my way through Europe for a summer. I find out that like halfway through my trip, like I have to come home because my roommate's like, I'm selling the house and I proposed to my girlfriend. And I'm like, what? So that was like at 25. And then I have this serving gig because I come back and I'm like trying to get PR jobs. And then every day, every weekend is dedicated to just drinking and partying. And then I decide that I'm going to do PR on my own because I can't get a fucking job because it's like, at this point it was like 2011. So PR was sort of this thing, like you had to know someone. And I had a job before I went to Europe. But when I came back, they were like, oh, the job's not available anymore. So I was like, I'm going to do this thing on my own. I'm going to work with musicians and artists. And I did it.
Right.
And I did it for like a couple years until my drinking got worse. And then people were like, no one ever told me like, oh, you're not doing a good job. Everyone was just always kind of like, all right, I think you got me as far as I needed. And we're going to move on. So everyone was always like really gently. Everyone around me was kind of like, gently sort of leaving me, but not telling me really why. I was always the friend that like made commitments and broke promises. Right. Yeah. I was always sort of like this flaky friend. I always bailed on everyone. So I put the PR stuff on hold. It never was something that I ever stopped officially doing, but it wasn't my focus anymore. I was working at this wine bar in the Arts District where I was meeting like all these really like affluent people in entertainment that were kind of just under the radar. Like I didn't know who any of them were, but then I would have conversations and they're like, oh, I write for this TV show or I do this. And I had made like really good friends with this couple. And after hanging out at a summer of them just coming to this wine bar and then us all hanging out after, I had developed this like community of like really talented creative friends. And my friend Greg was like, hey, I can help you write a stand-up set. Like, I love comedy. I write comedy. Like, why don't you write some jokes down and then we'll go over them? And he helped me do that. And then it took me like probably 6 more months to finally get on stage. And then I ended up at this open mic.
Why 6 months to get on stage? Because you kept putting it off? I
was just so scared. Yeah. I was like, I'm going to do it. And like, I wrote it on Facebook, like, hey guys, I'm going to go do comedy for the first time. Right. Because I was like, oh, if I write it on Facebook, like, you have to fucking do it. Right? Yeah. So I ended up at this open mic called at the Haha Cafe Comedy Club. There's 2 Hahas now, but the old one off of Lancashire. And I get there, and it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm like terrified, and I'm like, I have the great idea of I'm like, I'll have a drink. Right. But then, of course, it's like a lottery, and if you don't know what a lottery is, it's when they like pull your name out of a hat, and you sit there essentially all night until your name is called for your 3 to 5 minutes. So, of course, I'm there for 2 hours, and I have 3 beers, and then I get on stage, and I think I kill it. Right. Because everyone is laughing. People are coming up to me after, and I'm like, I got to do this every night. Right. And I did. I did that open mic
So you enjoyed it. Like, you had a great time.
I loved it. I thought it was the best.
Do you have a tape of that?
I used to. And then my cell phone got stolen.
No, that's too bad.
I had all my sets. Like, I would record, because I'd had friends in stand-up, so they were like, this is what you do. You go to this open mic, you record every set, you listen to it after. Right. So I end up, like, that was, like, the start of, oh, I'm funny when I drink on stage. And so I do that. This is, like, 2012, like, the end of 2012. So until, for, like, the next 5 years, essentially, like, I become a comedian.
And are you still working in the wine bar the whole time?
I worked at the wine bar for like another 9 months, and then I ended up at like various other restaurants and bars. Like I worked at Tom Bergen's on Fairfax.
What would you do? Were you a waitress or were you a hostess?
I was always a server. Yeah, yeah, I was always a server, and then I always did freelance on the side, like PR. So like I was like writing Wikipedia pages for like musicians, like at Universal Music hired me as a freelancer. Right. Like other like various like random companies, like remember British Knights, that shoe? No. Oh my god, it's like a really famous shoe from like the 80s. Right. they're like really big in the hip hop world. Like
Right.
they had hired me. Like I was getting like all these weird like artist connections.
Right.
And then I was doing stand up, and then everything seemed to be going really well. Like I was getting booked on every show. I was, you know, like I was new in town, but like I was building all these connections. I was hanging out at the Comedy Store every night.
Right.
And then 2014, I discovered MDMA. Like I started really late in life. Like I discovered psychedelics, and I was like,
right.
oh my God, I really love feeling this all the time.
MDMA is ecstasy.
Yeah,
Molly,
it's like it's like Molly, and so I started doing that like for an entire summer, and then that kind of spiraled into this like habit, and then I got into a relationship, and he was kind of like at that point the person that was supposed to save me essentially.
Right.
But he was a drinker too. I started blacking out probably around that time. Like every time I drank, certain parts of my night would be gone, and it was always
Sure.
that like really scary feeling of like what happened last night, and
Ugh,
I
the
feel
worst.
like I did something, and I was always that friend. I was always that friend. My whole drinking career was that friend of like periodically wondering like what I did
Right.
and what did I say, and most of the time people were like, oh, you were fine.
Right.
And then there were times where people were like, you said this to this person, and
Right.
you like, and I'm like, it would be completely gone.
Yeah.
And so when I got into this relationship, he wasn't super into like any of that stuff except drinking really.
Right.
But I didn't, you know, when I got into the relationship, it was just like misery loves company. Like we were two, at this point I had found out we were two like really depressed people
Right.
that were just trying to make it in comedy and work a day job so we could like pay the rent, and we did not fit together.
Right.
Those were the only things we had in common.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I guess. But then, like, 2.5, 3 years into it, I'm like miserable.
Right.
I'm not doing comedy as much. I like put on a ton of weight. I get super depressed because, like, when you're living in LA, like, you're a woman, like, you know, the outside is what matters
Sure.
most. And I just don't feel good about myself, and I'm fucking miserable. And I break up with him. I quit my job, and I move out of our place all within like a day.
Right.
And I'm just like, I'm quitting this life and I'm starting over, because that's what you do, right? Like as like an alcoholic, you think like, oh, I'm going to do a geographic. I don't go very far. I just change
Everything.
everything
Right.
in my apartment. And then I end up,
You change everything except yourself.
yeah, except myself. I'm like, this is what's going to like
Right.
make me better, right? So, you know, and then I start reflecting on like the series of events, like why did I end up in this relationship? And my drinking never fucking occurred to me. It was never like, oh my God, I have a problem. It was everyone else around me had fucking problems.
Right.
And like I was always the victim. So this was like 2017. This was probably like my pinnacle. So I'm back. I'm single. I'm back out there. I'm doing comedy every night again. I pick up like the psychedelics again because I just, you know, I really liked escaping.
Sure.
And shit starts to get real dark.
Right.
And I'm not having fun.
Right.
But I don't know how else to fix that.
Right. Except more.
Except more and trying to get attention. So
Yeah,
I'm like
totally.
dating. I'm like dating hardcore,
Right.
but like not seriously. I'm like whatever. I just need like all the attention.
Right. Dudes.
Yeah, and I'm living like in Hollywood off of Wilcox by a bar and a
Right.
liquor store, which is
Oh
like
yeah, I
the
know
worst.
that corner.
Oh yeah, and then I get a new day job
Right.
that's like supposed to fulfill me because I'm like, oh, now I can like pay my rent and I know what I'm making and then I can do comedy. And then I go to the Comedy Store and I end up getting on Potluck, which is like their like open mic where the booker watches, and I'm late and I need a drink. And I'm terrified because I've been doing comedy at this point for, 5.5, 6 years. And I'm like, I have to have a drink before I get on stage. And I'm talking to one of my friends that was working the box office. And she's like, why do you need a drink? And she was sober.
Right.
And I'm like, I need a drink because I'm scared and I've never gone on stage without a drink. And she's like, you don't need a drink. So then the host comes up to me and I'm about to go get a whiskey. And he's like, you're on next. So I'm like, shit. I'm like, well, I guess I'm doing this. And I get up there and I have like a pretty decent set. And I'm like, oh, I can do comedy without drinking.
Wow.
Like that was the thought. Like, okay, I'm just only going to drink when I do I'm not going to drink when I do stand up. Like that's when I'm not going to drink.
Right.
And so I get off stage and she's like telling me like, oh yeah, I really liked this joke that you had. And she's like, you seemed like really level and like fine. Right. And she's like, do you drink every time you go on stage? And I was like, yeah. She's like, people really can notice when someone's drinking when they're on stage. She's like, it's not a good look. And she's like telling me all this stuff. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm like, what?
This is the host or the booker?
No, this was just one of the girls that was working the box office that had been a friend of mine.
Right.
That I had just seen around and through comedy. And that was in May of 2018. And then I end up getting like a booked spot on Potluck again. And I don't drink, and I have an amazing set, and like comics that have never even talked to me like come up and they were like, you only do 3 minutes, but it's supposed to be like your A material. And the crowd was just really hot that night. They're like, you were so, and I was like, oh. And so then I go and celebrate. It's June 19th, 2018. June 18th, sorry. And I'm like, fuck yeah, I need to keep this feeling going. So I go to the bar, I drink, I run into a few of like comedians and they're like, hey, we're going to go hit up this other show and then we're going to go to these mics. Do you want to come? So it's a Monday night. I end up going with them. I like go do 3 more spots. I'm like riding the wave. And this is after like a year and a half of hardcore like drinking, partying. I'm thinking like I'm back in comedy after getting out of this really terrible relationship that I thought had hindered me. I didn't realize that it was just myself.
Sure.
And I black out. And I wake up at 5 a.m. in my apartment Tuesday, and there's people in my apartment, and I don't remember anything except being in the Comedy Store bar after my set. That's all I remember.
Right.
I just know that I went to all those places because people told me.
But you have your clothes on.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
And I'm like shuffling like people out the door, and I'm
you're giving me this look like,
I'm
what
like,
the fuck, Nick?
Well, I'm like, like this one guy like doesn't want to leave for whatever reason, and I'm thinking like, oh, something probably happened with him, and I'm like shuffling him out the door, and I'm like feeling fucking miserable.
Right.
And I should be happy because I finally like, for years comedians try to get on Potluck at the Comedy Store, and it's like this like pinnacle thing where it's supposed to like drive you, and I'm fucking miserable, and I have to go to my day job.
And you've done well.
And I had done well.
Right, because you can get on that show and eat shit, and then you want to kill yourself.
Yeah, and I had done well, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and I'm like, I'm disgusting, like, because I'm trying to remember what happened all night.
Right.
And then I start getting flashbacks of like certain things, like I'm a fly on the wall, and I'm just like, fuck this. Like, I can't live like this anymore. And so I go to work, and I feel sick, and not hangover sick, just sick. Like,
existentially depleted. And
I'm like having this like internal panic attack. And one of my coworkers is like, you don't look good. And I was like, I don't feel good. I have to go. And I just walk out of work. It's 11 o'clock.
What are you doing for work at this point?
I was working as like a concierge. Right. So I was working like, but like doing like events and concierge services for like people in a commercial building. Right. So, and I'm like guest facing. So like people are coming up to my desk, and I'm just like, I look like death. Right. And I'm like puffy, and I'm bloated, and I'm like 36 pounds heavier than I am now. I look like a like white Kardashian, but like 4'11". And I think to myself, I'm good. I'm done. Like I start having like crazy, like dark thoughts, and I call a friend, and I'm like, and I call the girl. Oh, right. I was going to say, if I was going to call anyone, I'd call that box office chick. Yeah, so I call her, and I'm like, hey, I think I need to change my life, but I also really want to drive off a cliff right now. I want to die, and I'm just like sobbing, and I'm just saying all this like dark shit, and she's like, well, maybe before you decide to drive off a cliff, why don't you, like, she's like, where are you right now? And I'm like, I'm going home. And she's like, well, can you be with people? And she's like, because I want to talk to you, but like, I'm working right now. Right. I'll call you back in like 2 hours. She's like, but can you please just go? Are there any friends you can hang out with? Like, so you're not alone. And I'm like, yeah. That's
such good advice. Man.
Yeah. So she calms me down. I go home. I take a shower. I like lay in fetal position for like an hour, and then I go over to my friend's house, and they're like actor creative types that are home during the day, and I'd lay on their floor in fetal position for like hours. And they're just like, they don't know what to do with me, but they're just there. And then she calls. And I'm sitting out front of their house, and she's like, all right, what part of town are you in? And I tell her, and she's like, okay, I'm looking up. There's a support group in, like, on this street at this time. And I'm making up every excuse, like, because I don't think that I need the program.
Right.
At this time. I'm like, no, I just need to dry out. And she's like, well, what happened? And I tell her my whole night, and she's like, has this happened before? And I'm flashing back to like 10 years of just like the same story over and over.
It's only happened to me like 1,000 times.
Yeah, like every other time that I'm partying. Right. And she's like, all right, well, before you decide to do any of this, she's like, there's a meeting every half hour in this town. Like, just get to a meeting and then call me. So I end up going to this meeting. And,
where was it?
And this was on Melrose, like off of La Brea.
Mm-hmm.
And I walk in, it's like packed, and I'd been dried out for 12 hours. I'm like so puffy from crying for the entire, like I just feel like death. But I walk into this meeting, and this guy's talking, and he says something that resonates. And the minute he's done talking, they're like, who wants to share? And before I can even like process what I'm doing, I'm walking up to the podium, and I just like, I say my name, and I just like say, I'm 12 hours. I have 12 hours without anything in my system, and I need help.
Right.
And like, I say some other stuff, and I don't remember what, 'cause I black out in the moment of just like, it's like something is speaking through me. And I go back to my seat, and then after like 20 people rush me and like give me a hug, and like all these women give me their numbers, and I'm super freaked out, and I'm just like, I don't know if this is for me. And the next day, some of those women call me, and I kept going to meetings, and I did 90 and 90, as they say. And then I go do a comedy show after. Right. And I like announce that I'm going to be a sober person. And,
how weird.
Yeah.
What an intense way to sort of come out as so, I don't know. For me, it was really like, I felt like the culture I was living in here in LA that I had chosen for myself was such a party culture that like, to tell people in that world that I was making this choice to be sober felt like I was coming out of the closet. Like, I am a sober person now. Yeah. And it was intense. It was hard. And I was embarrassed for myself. Yeah. That like clearly I had a problem that I had to deal with. And you did that on stage.
I know. So it was funny. I like made a joke. I was like, guys, I'm like
so intense. Yeah. But like rip the Band-Aid off. Yeah. Like, we're here.
Well, I remember when I did it, because it was at the pre-Rose battle. Everyone there had seen me like loaded like days prior, and I like stopped people in their tracks. Like the server stopped, like the host, everyone looked at me, and I like made a joke. I was like, guys, I'm 12 hours like without alcohol, and like everyone laughed. Right. But it was like in my head, I'm like, oh, okay, I can do this.
But there must have been other sober people in that room. Did people come up to you after the show?
Yeah, people were like, oh, like I didn't know that, like
this was a thing.
Yeah, and like we all kind of laughed about it, and and I had all those feelings too, because that's what kept me from like trying to get sober for so long, was like I didn't want to admit that I had a problem because I was embarrassed. I didn't want people to know. But then when I started to see that there were so many people in comedy and in my community that
you'd already made that choice.
Yeah, and LA makes it so much easier to get sober.
Great. Yeah. It's the best place to be sober because it's the coolest people in the town are sober.
Yeah. And everyone, and I had made a joke like 3 years prior on stage. I was like, I'm not famous yet, and you guys don't know who I am yet because I haven't gotten sober. Right. And like, because it was like every person, and I didn't know at the time that like,
how true it is.
That like, like your life starts to come together, and like within like 30, 60, and 90 days, like my life got really big. Like I booked like this cartoon that's not out yet, but hopefully soon. I like got a different day job where the hours were so perfect so I could still do stand-up, and like sustained me. Right. Like I was able to move out of that shitty neighborhood across from a bar and a liquor store that was like every day taunting me like, am I gonna drink today? And like my life like really, really quickly, like sobriety was like, oh, it like showed me like this is how you can live. And now, it hasn't been easy, but the first 90 days was like riding that like cloud. Yeah.
It's interesting because when you told me this story before, you had never done sober comedy
Ever.
until after that first meeting.
Yeah.
But in fact,
It was
you had done sober comedy twice.
Yeah, I forgot.
And but it's interesting because as I said last time, I've only done comedy sober. I didn't start doing comedy until I'd gotten sober.
Yeah.
And like the rules that were laid out for me by my comedy teacher were that you have to do, like, you're not allowed to do it messed up. Like, it's a sober endeavor. But doing it sober was such an intensely fulfilling experience. It just blew my mind to be that present in the moment and make a room full of people laugh. It made me feel, it was better than any drug I ever did.
Right.
And I wonder if having that experience right before this sort of crisis that ultimately wakes you up to be like, how those two, like, if like that was like a bubble of light that you had seen, like, doing potluck and being present and really doing well and being completely aware of what it feels like to do it well and to not be fucked up and to have complete control of all your tools.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was like, oh wait, what? Maybe there is, like, if that was like was it? Do you feel like that gave you a glimpse of it?
It did. I think looking back now, I know it's so funny now that I'm thinking about the last time we talked about this. I did forget that there were 2 times that I didn't drink, but I guess doing sober comedy for me was like being completely sober all the time.
Right. Well, and I guess also there's that thing where, like, you're now going to the store or you're going to wherever to do comedy, and there's no longer the promise that once it's over, there's both things. You're having to go through all the anxiety of the pre-show without tempering it with booze or drugs.
Yeah.
And then there's no promise of the reward after either.
Right. Which has been the first like 3 months of like, once I was dry, like officially sober and wasn't, and I was in the program, it was hard. Comedy was so hard, but I still felt good. Even when I was bombing, I was like, oh my God, like, but I did have those first few months being like, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I was never funny. Right. And now I have to do this sober. And then I got this gig in Vegas where I was opening for someone, and he was sober. And he was like, just have fun. Right. And I remember, like, the first couple of shows, like, I had fun. Right. And I got laughs. And, like, I did really well. And then there was one of the second to last shows where I was trying to, like, tie everything up and have this perfect 15-minute set. And I kind of, like, allowed the audience to sort of scare me a little bit. And I bombed. Like, and he had to come back and, like, and save the room with, he was the headliner, but it was like, but even then I had feelings of like, maybe I still, but I was like, no, you know what, this is part of it. Like, remember when you were drinking and you would bomb, and like, I was like, this is a different kind of bomb because I'm going to learn something from it. Right. Before it was like, oh, I just bombed because whatever, I forgot to say this. And I was fucked up.
Because you could always kind of like, I don't know, there was always there's always, like, I'd be hungover. I'd be too hungover to deal, or I'd be too drunk to deal, or like, whatever. I just don't feel it. And like, not about comedy, but everything else in my life. Yeah. And like, without that, there's no excuse.
Yeah, no. And everything that led up to this point, like, I had already by this time, like, lost friendships. People had started to cut themselves out of my life because of my drinking. And then stand-up was like, well, I've spent the last almost 7 years trying to do this thing. Like, am I really going to quit now? Because, like, now I'm finally, like, feeling good about myself again. Right. And, when it all stopped being fun, it was, like, a blessing in disguise because people started to now take me serious. Right. Whereas before, I thought everyone did, because I'd walk into every comedy club in town and I would know someone, and I would have my little crew, and people would say hi to me, and people would be like, oh, come do my show. And now it's like, oh, like, I have more meaningful connections in this community. I don't hang out as much. But
right, but you have a clearer head about evaluating also
Yeah.
who's real and who's not real and what's bullshit and what's, you know.
And it's crazy that this thing was the height of all of my drinking and using, and now is the only thing that really like keeps me going on the path of sobriety, essentially. Aside from like the outside looking, like I feel good about myself again. I'm repairing, you know, friendships, and I have a stronger like connection to like my parents now and my family. Like comedy has now been this thing where, oh, if I'm not doing comedy, I don't know if I would stay sober.
Right.
So it's like a driving force now.
Yeah,
so it's kind of all came full circle, which is really great because I've always like needed some type of creative outlet. And when I don't do stand up for a week because like I have to do life shit,
Right.
I feel like shit.
Right. It's like not going to the gym.
Yeah, it's sort of like, oh my God, like I'm my happiest. And and part of me always would think like the last like year, like, oh, why didn't I discover this sooner? Why didn't I talk to my friend sooner? But it doesn't, none of that matters anymore because now I'm like the best version or becoming the best version of myself in stand up and just in life in general. Like now I used to be perpetually late, and now like I actually like show up on time.
Right.
I think I got here at 8:58.
You were here on time,
yeah,
no doubt.
And
that's great. And the box office lady, are you guys still friendly?
Mm-hmm. So she's still a person that like I always check in with.
Right.
I just see her at the club.
Right.
She's married and like she's killing it and she's like doing her thing. And but yeah, I saw her like 3 weeks ago, and I hadn't seen her. I'd seen her in passing a couple of times, but, you know, we kind of always miss each other because she'll be working or she'll be doing shows on the road. And she was like, holy shit, like, you have a glow. She's like, that what everyone tells you when you get sober, right?
Totally.
And she's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm good. And it's crazy because I don't think I have the pink cloud anymore. There's not this, like, high of, like, I think, like, I rode that, and now it's, like, things have leveled out.
Sure.
But it really is like day by day.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm learning how to navigate certain things and not be in like self-pity all the time, because I can totally do that. Like, this person didn't text me back.
Here's a super programmy question.
Yeah.
Do you have a relationship with a higher power?
Yeah, I have a higher power. I talk to something. I don't really know what it is.
Does it have any relation to that like Christian God of your best friend back in the day?
Not really. And it's so funny because I always like, after I got out of like all the high school stuff and like trying to keep up with everyone and trying to like fit in somewhere, like fit into some type of box, I was like, I'm spiritual, because I've always like believed that there's something else out there, whether it's the universe, you know, whatever the cool term is supposed to be for whatever, like,
sure.
So I was always a chameleon, right? Like whatever group I was in. But yeah, I definitely like am living, and it's hard, but I'm living in this space of I can't control people, places, or things. So a lot of the time, like when I'm like struggling with feeling like, oh, why didn't I get on that show, or why doesn't this person want to hang out, or this and that, or just like little trivial things, I just like don't do anything. Whereas my action before would be to confront the person, or reach out to the book, or like constantly live in insecurity, but have to like have a reason for everything. And now having a quote unquote higher power, I can live in a space of, you know what, I'm not in control.
Right.
I'm in control of my reactions.
Right.
Like I can control how I react to things. But the biggest advice I can give any person that's like newly sober, and just what I've learned, is just a lot of the time, you just don't need to do anything. Don't send that text. If you write about it, if you're like feeling anxiety about a person or like a relationship and it's new, like talk to like 10 other people about it and consult them. I have a joke that like I have to consult 10 people before I send any text message to any like male suitor. Because I'm like a self-sabotager. I want to light a match when I get uncomfortable and shit starts to like not go my way, I want to light a match on it.
Shit.
Because it's so easy to just be done.
Destroy it, yeah.
Yeah.
God, that's what I want to do too.
All the
I
time.
didn't realize that till right now.
Really? Wow, well, you're welcome. Don't do anything.
All the times that I've done crazy shit trying to fix stuff. I'm such an idiot, man.
It's like sometimes you just have to like... Because I get anxiety crazy now. Like, I never knew that I had anxiety until I got sober. But, like, I'll just, like, be... Like, this tape will play, like, all the negative shit. Like, this person doesn't like you because of this. You shouldn't have said that. And, like, it's hard because I'm like, wait, am I not being myself all the time now? Because I'm constantly just pausing and stopping. Right. But, no, I'm being myself. I'm just, like, processing now.
Right.
Instead of reacting, because I'm so reactive. Like, it's my nature constantly to just be fucking reactive.
Well, and having that relationship with a higher power enables you, in theory, to put faith in that your higher power will do for you what you cannot do for yourself. So just sometimes fucking let the higher power do their work, you know? Like, stop trying to be that thing yourself and just, like, accept. I mean... I definitely have had moments of like intense anxiety and crisis where like I've just suddenly turned it over and then I'm like, oh wow, you know what? I'm going to be taken care of. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. Isn't it weird how everything's always going to be okay? Even if like something terribly shitty happens.
Right.
It's always going to be okay. And I'm very grateful that right now like I haven't had to experience any like really traumatizing events, and I know that that's just life. Like it's
gonna happen.
Yeah, like when I was still out there, I had 2 friends pass away in like 6 months, and that was extremely hard to deal with and mourn, especially being a drinker.
Right.
You know, and now it's like you can't like there's always going to be something, but when I get stuck in self, as they say, I do like try to do the right action and like call someone or does it like this week I'm off, right? I'm like taking vacation, so I like have a friend that needs to get picked up from the airport, and I'm like, I'm gonna go fucking pick them up because
you can.
Yeah, and helping someone
like be of service.
Yeah, it's like so much. It does feel good.
Yeah, it feels good. That's the bottom line. It feels good to help other people.
It does, and then you're like not stuck in yourself and like thinking about whatever your issue is. Like, what are my problems today? Honestly, I don't have one. It's just myself. Like I have to remember that all the time. Like, I'm so fucking grateful that I used to be a girl, and I said this when I actually took my cake, and I don't know where it came from, but I fucking said it and it stuck with me since. I took my cake on June 19th this summer. I used to be a girl with all the problems, and now I'm a girl that has a solution, because literally I was calling everyone all the time with my problems. Right. And now I'm like, I don't really have a problem. Like, you know, everything is fine all the time, because I'm able to remember that like I don't need to worry about everything all the time. You know, I had the job, I had the apartment, I had all these things where on the surface it's so easy to just be like, oh, I'm fine. I'm like a functioning person in society.
Right.
You know, but it's what was going on when people weren't looking.
Or inside.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Well, Lori, thanks for coming back and doing this again. It was totally different, but I totally enjoyed it. So thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Hey, so if you've been enjoying this podcast, you can head over to my Patreon page and feel completely free to support the show with a modest contribution at www.patreon.com/thedrunkalogs. Drunkalogs cover art is designed and created by John DeManil, and the Drunkalogs theme song is composed and performed by Stephen Stout. I am Nick Morton.